Well, a very, very warm welcome to this session, to everybody here and to everybody online. Thank you very much for coming to listen to Doing Dairy Differently. My name is Sara Hall. I'm part of the research team at Pasture for Life, who are here in the main hall. So please do go along and have a chat with them. If you're into pasture and you're into livestock, they're a fantastic organisation, and they do have a fantastic offer on membership as well, I'm going to say. Last to say on that. Unfortunately, you might notice we're missing one person up here on the stage. Oliver Chedgey was unable to make it from the roaming dairy, and so his specific insights into the mobile dairy parlour that he runs and the integration into arable systems will be missing. But it does mean we get to focus on the expertise we have on the stage here around cow-calf contact dairies, which is exciting for all of us. So it probably, in terms of... I haven't introduced myself. I'm Sara Hall. Sorry, I said I was at Pasture for Life. I'm also a researcher at Bristol Vet School in dairy sustainability and a farmer. And I meet a lot of amazing dairy farmers all across the UK, and I think everyone will be aware that they are under an enormous lot of pressure from society, from their processors, from policy and government. And the headlines are very often focusing on carbon and on emissions. But today, I'm hoping we're going to be talking much more holistically with a focus on cow-calf contact systems, talking about the practicalities of being a dairy farmer who may be looking at going into it or who's already operating it, like these guys up here, the benefits, the barriers and the challenges, and the wider ethical need for societal license. We have... these guys, the two are actually currently running cow-calf dairies, and I know, Anna, you've run a couple of experiments on your own farm, but cow-calf contact is still very much pushing boundaries in the dairy industry here in the UK. It does ruffle feathers, there's no doubt, and these guys are certainly qualified to talk about it. I thought it might be important to maybe talk about cow-calf contact as what actually is it and what are we talking about today. And essentially, we're looking at calves that remain with their mums, and that could be their biological mum or a foster mum, to derive their core nutrition. And that will be for as long as the calves would be fed in a conventional system as a minimum amount of time, so 8 weeks for conventional or 12 weeks for organic. And it is gaining significant traction, both here in the UK and across the world. Previously, it's been a very under-researched topic, which means it's very hard from a knowledge exchange position for farmers to find out how to even consider it in their own setting. Interestingly, last year, a research project called Transform DairyNet with €3 million funding has started. And its very objective is to set up 11 hubs across Europe, specifically looking at how farmers are practically implementing it, and for knowledge exchange to take place and for research to be happening on the ground. So that will give us some exciting evidence. But critically, farmers are finding that something once considered impossible in commercial modern dairy farming is not only practical, but potentially scalable. And that's hopefully what we'll be talking about. So a quick overview of how we'll be running through the session today. Each of the farmers has very kindly offered to give a short presentation purely to put some context to their own lives, their experience and their systems, their own dairies at home. I'll be asking them some questions and getting into a bit of a conversation, and then we'll open out to you guys, the audience, both here today and live online at the end. So without further ado, I'm very excited to introduce Anna, who's at the end here. She is a farm consultant, freelance writer and dairy farmer from West Wales. She and her partner are contract farming 300 spring block calving cows on a grazing system. And she's also a 2021 Nuffield Scholar, and she was exploring the topic cow-calf contact, dairy's ethical future. And she was also last year awarded Dairy Industry Woman of the Year, which I think is absolutely fantastic. Yeah, I think it's worth an applause, definitely. Phyllida, Warmington, is a dairy farmer from Somerset. It's a family farm, and she runs the Cothelstone Micro Dairy. She's selling raw milk from her 100% pasture-fed cows. And Hallam Duckworth set up the dairy at Honeydale. It's a micro dairy running from Farm Ed in the Cotswolds, which many of you will be familiar with. And he's implemented an alternative approach to dairy farming with the focus on cows with calves at foot, and produces, I gather, delicious ice cream and milk. So without further ado, Hal, if you want to make a start, and then Phil will be talking, and then Anna at the end.
Right, I'll go down here.
Yeah, but you can stand at the lectern or from here, whichever you prefer.
Okie dokes. Hello, everybody. My name's Hallam. I run and own the dairy at Honeydale. So we set up in 2021, so we're entering our 5th year now. It's been it was a bit of a roller coaster, but like Sara said, when we started, it was very hard to find information on how it was going to work, if it was going to work, and all that sort of thing. We could find dairies that were doing calf at foot, we could find dairies that were doing once a day, and all this sort of thing. But to combine all of them was quite challenging to find. So, the first year was not a complete disaster, but pretty close. And then, with every mistake we make, the next year you go, okay, we'll change that. So it does get progressively easier. So we set up as a commercial enterprise. A lot of micro dairies set up as a sort of hobby type thing, or because they have, a moral disposition against commercial dairies. We set up purely for the fact of making money. I'm from a non-farming background. I'm the first generation, so in my opinion, there are 2 options. One is scale and one is niche. I didn't have the option of scale, so we went with a niche product being micro dairy and the products that it can create from that. Like I said, we're based at Farm Ed, which is great. If you haven't been, definitely go. And that sort of gives us access to a certain amount of the land there. There are other micro businesses there, but we're all sort of cogs in a big wheel. Lots of herbal lays, lots of permanent pasture, and all that sort of thing. Oh, there we go. We also have a large patch of sainfoin which we mow in the summer and make silage, and that is the only thing that cows are fed over winter. We chose to go with Austrian Fleckviehs. This is not probably the common choice for a micro dairy. You'll see most of them using jerseys, probably. I have got my predominant experience in beef. So my sort of requirement was I wanted a dairy cow that looked like a beef cow, and that was what a Fleckvieh is. It comes with its own benefits as well. They got, they're not as overbred as what your black and white cows are. We experience really good fertility, good feet, good milk yields in comparison to what people think they are. There's a lot of movement towards Fleckviehs now, and I think you'll see a lot more of them because commercially they are standing up to your black and whites. We milk once a day, partly because it was and still is it's a part-time thing. I'd love it to be full-time one day, but it's not at the moment. So I had to free up the rest of my day. So we milk once a day, and that was one reason why we kept the calves at foot. The calves act as basically like a second milking. Fleckviehs have a tendency to get a bit fat and dry off early, so it just made the cow work a little bit harder and kept that level of production up. All our milk's processed on site. We do fresh milk in glass bottles, all recyclable, returnable, and we started doing ice cream in 2023, which was good. Bad summers, but good. For considering we were quite lucky with what we managed to achieve. Trying to win over just small. We don't need big places. We just need small places, little shops and things like that. But it's a sort of slow burner. But it definitely adds a bit of security because obviously the milk is short shelf life, whereas ice cream you've got that extended lifespan. So. here it's, don't worry, it's mainly pictures. So here's they're our original 3 that we bought. So they were actually imported from Austria. We bought them from a chap in Wrexham who was doing a lot of interesting breeding stuff with them up there. So we were quite lucky to find them. There's one of our heifers that we bought. So we calved 2 heifers in the second year, which was good. And it's just, yeah, it's quite, having the Fleckby was quite interesting because it gave us something slightly different to talk about, because a lot of people didn't recognise them. So obviously at Farmhead there's a lot of people coming around all the time, and it was quite, it was a good sort of conversation starter. It's gone the wrong way. So if you tilt your head that way, that's our very basic milking setup. So the cows would come in, it's a 2-stall, a breast type parlour. We just milk with 1 dump bucket and just switch it from one cow to the other. So while one's milking, the other one's getting ready. And then they loop round, calves have been separated, and they'll run onto the bed. And then some of them, like that cow, she'll multi-suckle, and some of them just stick to their own. But you'll never milk a cow out if she's got a calf on the other side of the wall, which can be quite frustrating sometimes, but that is sort of the point of the whole thing. So yeah, here's the products. We've got milk on the right-hand side, and then we convert a little trailer and sell at little shows and things like that, and then we do little pots of ice cream for sort of retail-y type things. So milk once a day. We have quite a short milking season. Obviously, normally you'd only have 8 weeks off on a commercial dairy. We really wanted to stick to just milking with the grass that we had available. Well, grass and herbal lay that we had available. So we actually have a slightly shorter milking window. And it worked quite well. People were saying, you'll never get your customers back, but actually annually we increased our numbers of customers. We did lose some, don't get me wrong, but they did tend to come back. We used AI mainly because of size. It wasn't feasible to have a bull all year round, and I'm quite sort of into the genetic side of things, and what I can buy in a straw, a top 3% bull in a straw for 20 quid, I could never afford the actual bull. So that just sort of accelerated our own genetics. We calve indoor, and then as soon as they've calved, within sort of 48 hours, we turn the cows out. That's partly why we calve slightly later, so there's a bit of grass to go on. Herbal lays in the summer, we normally get 2 grazes out of them, and then they run on permanent pasture for the rest of it. There's ample grass, so you don't have to worry too much. It's all mob grazed, split up into paddocks. Calves separated in 48 hours, so we don't milk for the first 48 hours, and we'll leave them completely just untouched for the first 48, just to maximise the amount of colostrum that the calves can get in, and then we'll start milking just once a day after that. The separation time changes, so initially at calving, the calf drinks very little milk in terms of what you're trying to produce. So we can separate them at 9, 10 at night in the spring when it's nice weather, and then it does tend to slowly creep forward as the calf's demand goes up, the cow's yield starts to come down with the grass, and that's sort of when you decide on weaning. It does change annually. In that year where it was a terrible drought, they went slightly earlier. The year before, they were on slightly later. It just depends on how much you're producing compared to how much you need to be selling. And we used the quiet wean nose flaps, which worked really well. We liked them. I would recommend them, to be honest. It was very calm and cool, and the cow didn't know it had been weaned, the calf didn't know it had been weaned. And actually, in terms of then separating them then after, it sort of broke that initial bond. And your milk yield goes up massively, which is wonderful, without any sort of stress levels. So that's like our star cow. And these sort of pictures with the calves, it's such a useful tool in selling. So like if you're trying to, if you're not your only USP, but one of the big USPs, obviously, compared to commercial milk, is that you've got calves, which is obviously really nice to plaster everywhere. But this is not a witch hunt against commercial dairies. I've worked on commercial dairies. I've seen, on the farms I've been on, there's been absolutely nothing wrong with them. This was simply a choice made by me because I needed to do something different other than milk 200 cows, because that wasn't an option. So it's not like, we shouldn't be drinking milk from Tesco. It's not that at all. It's just a different way of doing it, basically. There's the nose flaps. Really good. Really like them. I haven't found many people that are doing them on a large scale, but I would be interested to know what success people have had. You can't keep them on forever, because they do manage to get them off eventually. But they're good in the initial stages. Some calves grazing herbal lay. Again, depending on the time when you wean, sometimes we'll have the cows over the herbal lays, or sometimes, like not last year, one before, we had the calves go up on the herbal lay for the second graze. It's a great grazing, food for them. The nutrition in it is far superior to permanent pasture, and we've found that they did really well on it. And that's it. It was like I said, a bit of a roller coaster, but it was a good experience. Hopefully, we'll go from strength to strength and keep doing more fleck fees, and hopefully everyone in the microdairy world will do fleck fees instead of jerseys, and then we'll all be happy. So thank you very much. I think that's for you.
Hi everyone. Can you hear me here? No? I do have a mic, but my name is Phyllida, Warmington. I set up Cottleston Microdairy in 2022. It's set on just less than 30 acres of the family farm. No history of dairy on the farm or in the family, and I don't have a background in agriculture or any experience with dairy, so most of it's been learnt with YouTube videos and books and people being generous with their time. 100% pasture-fed, cow-calf dairy, and we're on the Quantock Hills in West Somerset. So similar to Hallam, the cows are milked seasonally from kind of Feb-March time through to October, November. I think this is probably the riskiest business decision, as Hallam touched on. Getting customers back is not necessarily straightforward, but it's something I'm quite kind of ideologically tethered to. I think dairy isn't often considered to be a seasonal product, but it works incredibly well in a pasture-fed system, especially a small one. Human welfare, I think about a lot in dairying systems. I don't want to milk cows 365 days of the year, so it's really nice to have a solid chunk of time off, and a chunk of time when I'm not running fridges and electricity and hot water and maximising the milk from grass. Embarrassingly simple system, it really is. So dual-purpose cows bred back to Angus. It was a very intentional decision to move away from pure dairy-bred cows. I ask a lot of them. They're giving milk to me in the parlour, they're raising a calf, a really nice beefy calf, and all on forage. So I want them to look after themselves and hold their condition. So I use an adaptive approach to small paddock grazing, so lots of electric fencing, daily moves. So they're grazed almost all the year and throughout the winter when they're dry. So being able to outwinter them until calving is a really big motivator, again, for the seasonal system. So all milk is sold raw as liquid milk. You can see this is a little honesty fridge. When I said simple, I really meant it. So about 50-50 from the farm gate, and last year was the first year I shipped milk via overnight courier. So that seemed to work pretty well. So the raw aspect of the whole business is definitely the biggest USP. It's what people come for, it's what they'll pay for. People into raw milk are quite fanatical about raw milk. I expect anywhere between 9 to 15 litres a cow a day. So this does depend on the time of year. And when I say low input, I'm not kind of feeding hay or silage through the summer or on the shoulders of the year. So this really is from the cows grazing. Nutrient density over quantity. Yield isn't an irrelevant metric, but it's one of the less interesting ones to me. I want to be able to sell a product that's like remarkably different from the milk people are buying in supermarkets. So cow-calf dairy, the calves are kept with the cows until 6 to 9 months old. This is much longer than I had anticipated when starting out, but actually once they're in a routine, I'm in a routine, I think it seems to work pretty well, and I think the calves actually seem to kind of maintain the milk supply from the cows, which is interesting. So I begin overnight parting about 48 hours old. Again, something that I've played around with and varied approach, but it seems to work quite well. It just becomes an intrinsic part of the cow's routine. So once day milking in the morning, the cows are then reunited with their calves for the day. And to part, the cows are then moved to their next paddock in the evening. Work in progress managing cow-calf contact. I haven't got it down, and I think often we maybe want it to be a kind of tick-box solution to animal welfare. And while I think, like anything, if it's managed well, it can work really well, I don't think it's necessarily straightforward. So some animals I finished to sell beef direct. There's such a hunger for beef from dairy systems, which I think is incredibly reassuring. And people as well that might not choose to eat meat but drink the milk or consume the dairy, who then feel invested in the system. So my plans over the next couple of years is probably to expand the beef side. At the farm, I have an open farm gate policy, so I'm really passionate about engaging customers with the food that they're buying, and that's been one of the best things I've done, and I always learn much more from other people than they ever do from me, so would encourage others to do the same. And yeah, that's us. Thank you.
Hi, so I'm Anna and I'm a dairy farmer from West Wales. I was born in Carmarthenshire. I'm a first language Welsh speaker, and my family have been farming dairy cows in West Wales for now about 120 years. So my brother and father are now on the home farm. The photo you can see on the top left-hand side is this year they celebrated 100 years of pedigree Holsteins. So my brother and father are on the home farm. I would never really expected to get into practical farming, not because they put the barrier there, but just I didn't really think it was for me. So I went to university, to the Royal Agricultural College. I did an integrated equine and agriculture degree as my undergraduate, and then did a master's in sustainable agriculture, which focused mostly on international rural development, and then worked in the fresh produce sector and in beef and sheep genetics before feeling what in Wales we call like that hiraeth, and coming back to West Wales. So I now work as a farm business consultant, specialising in grass-based dairy systems, and I work with dairy farmers across the UK, and I'm in a contract farming agreement with 300 spring block calving dairy cows, which is the photo you can see on the bottom left. And then relevant to my Nuffield, I'm also quite involved with retraining racehorses, so that's my horse on his journey from racing out of it. It's worked. Okay, I think that's worked. Okay, so a bit about our farm. So we've got, there's a 190 hectare grassland farm, everything's down to grass, and in the red dot is it, so we're looking over towards Ireland, so prime dairy country in West Wales. We're not that far from the sea in Llangrannog, and the farm rises up to 1,000 feet at its highest point. So we've got 300 spring block calving crossbred cows, so a mixture of Frisian and Jersey with a bit of Norwegian red in, and they calve in a 12-week block from the middle of February. So at the moment we've got under 100 cows in milk, which is in that process of drying them off. And they graze for up to 10 months of the year, and then they're housed over the winter. The real reason for housing them then would be mostly the ground conditions, just protecting the soil over the winter. obviously there's not enough grass for them either, but bringing them in for that reason. And then they're fed grass silage on the shoulder months and through the winter. Around a tonne of concentrate feed per year, which is fairly low in terms of commercial dairy systems, and they'll produce between 5 and 5,500 litres each per year. But our focus is really on milk quality rather than quantity. We're on a solids contract selling milk to make mozzarella with Leprino cheese, and they'll produce up to 480 kilograms of milk solid per cow per year, and the cows are weighing about half a tonne each. So it's a very simple system. It's a 24/48 swing over Waikato parlour with one person milking, and then some basic shed infrastructure, so some indoor and outdoor cubicles. And that's the cows on the right. This is very sensitive, you just touch it. That's the cows on the right walking into milk, and then that's some cows grazing a herbal lay on the farm. So we farm through a contract farming agreement. So this is a model of really showing how the cash moves through it. So the farm owners supply the land, and they actually own all but 2 of the cows. We own 1 cow and her heifer. They were a gift from my father. Her name's Claudia, and she's the direct descendant of the first pedigree cows that my great-grandfather brought onto the farm 100 years ago. And then we supply all the labour and machinery. So we employ everybody who works on the farm. We supply all the machinery. When the agreement started in 2018, my now husband bought half the machinery. I bought half of his business in 2021, and we bought the rest of the machinery. So we're paid a return on capital for supplying that machinery, and we're paid a contracting fee to cover the power and labour costs. The farm owners are paid a return on capital for providing the infrastructure and the cows. They have a retention of profit then for supplying the land, and at the end of it, the surplus is split between us. So they're very much the farmers. The difference is a contract farming agreement. We are contracted to run the farm, and they are actively farming. So that's, it's quite a complicated diagram until you actually get to understand it. But the real motivation for us then is that the majority of the surplus at the end of it comes back to us. So everybody plays a role in the farm running. The balance of risk actually falls to the farmer because they are actively farming. So when the contract ends and there is a deficit, that deficit belongs to them, not to us. So they take a risk by having us there as contractors, but we run the day-to-day operations of the farm. The benefits for us is that it enabled us to go into a pretty decently sized dairy farm with very minimal capital. So the amount of money we had going into it would have been nowhere near enough to take on a tenancy, but it enabled us to build our balance sheet. So our ambitions for the future would be that we would be able to get the tenancy, and this is a kind of a mechanism for being able to get there. So in 2021, I was given an Nuffield scholarship somehow to the topic Cow-Calf Contact, Dairy's Ethical Future. So I started off with quite a wide remit, and part of it was looking at dairy beef calves as well. Quite quickly in the process, really came to understand that what we need to do about dairy beef calves, that information is all there. We just need the kind of industry cooperation to actually make that work between the dairy and beef sectors. But my interest really grew actually to look at cow-calf contact dairying, and the question I kept asking myself was, if we were going to redesign the dairy industry from scratch without the kind of limitations that are already in place, what would we do the same and what would we do differently? So I wanted to look at how cow-calf contact dairying could work, not just on like a new system that you're designing, but could it work on existing dairy farms, and could it work without selling added value milk produce? And I also looked a bit at the social license lessons that the dairy industry can learn from the racing industry. So I visited 11 countries. A lot of them were in Northern Europe because a lot of the cow-calf contact research and a lot of the commercial cow-calf contact dairies are in Northern Europe. But I also went to a cow-calf contact farm in Chile. I looked at a lot of dairy beef there. Went to Australia and New Zealand, and also went to the United Arab Emirates to look at some of the sort of racehorse retraining centres there. So the key messages that really came out for me were that cow-calf contact systems can be financially viable on a conventional, in quotation marks, dairy farm, but further research is needed. There's not a lot of information out there about how it works practically on farm, and until we've got that, it's quite difficult for people to actually take that step and implement it. There are lots of different cow-calf contact systems. They've all got different challenges and opportunities. So the challenges for a foster calf system are very different to somebody running a full dam-based system or running partial contact. And, as Phyllida alluded to earlier, it's not a silver bullet solution to dairy social licence challenge. It's also not a silver bullet solution to welfare. You can have poor animal welfare in a cow-calf contact system just as much as you can in a conventional system. But it has got a huge amount of benefits, and the one thing that every single farmer who did it said to me was that it made them happier. So it wasn't just bringing benefits to their animals, but it made them happier by doing it. And then a bit about racing industry there as well. So in 2023, I came back from New Zealand, having met a farmer out there called Chris Faulkner, who is running, I think, the biggest cow-calf contact system that I visited. There is actually a farm in Germany with 1,000 cows who are doing it, but he was the biggest farm I visited on my Nuffield. He's got about 300 cows in a very traditional Kiwi system. So spring block, he's split block calving, not spring, but fully outside, lots of tracks, quite long walking distances, milks once a day. And he is also used to be a consultant at the Anderson Centre. So I knew that his financial modelling was quite robust. And the advice he gave to me was start small. He said, you don't have to go into it on day one and do all 300 cows. Have a go at doing it with a small group. So bearing in mind that with our business structure, you've got to have buy-in from everybody on the farm. I went back and sort of said, can we try this with the cows that calve in the last 3 weeks of calving? So imagine on a spring block calving system, about half of the herd will calve in the first 2 weeks. And by the last 3 weeks of a block, there's not that many cows calving. If we've got turnout about 1st of March, the cows will go outside. So early on in the block, the cows are calving and they're actually staying in the shed until they're ready to go outside. By the end of a calving block, the cows are calving and they're going pretty much outside straight away. And the infrastructure is our real limitation for this system. So the last 3 weeks of calving, I had 7 cows left to calve, and we kept the calves on them in that photo. So they were all in calf to beef just because of where they were in the system. They all calved inside in a straw yard, and I fed colostrum to all the calves. So I tested all the colostrum on the farm. Just wanted to make sure that all those calves had adequate quality colostrum in that first feed, and then turned them out at grass with their mothers. So they were in a group. There were also a few other cows that had calved, just before them in that group, and a couple of cows that would have been there to have their feet trimmed. So they were monitored quite closely. The cows were milked twice a day, and based on just comparisons between the cows in that group that didn't have their calves on them and were in a similar stage of lactation and those that did, I think the calves at that point were drinking about 8 litres of milk a day. So just some photos just to give you context. So that's one of the calves outside with their mothers. Then we gave the calves, and again it was a lesson I learned from Chris in New Zealand, was to give calves that freedom of choice. So when it came to milking, if they wanted to stay outside in the paddock, they could. If they wanted to come in with their mothers, they could. And once they were in the shed, they could go into the parlour, or we were trying to keep them in a pen outside. What we did find is once the calves have gone into the parlour once, they're not that keen to go in again because it's quite loud, it's quite noisy. A few of them fell into the pit and, that kind of thing. So it's a bit chaotic, and you can see that one at the end. So once they've gone in once, they're not that keen to go in again, and then they'll hang back and wait. And they get into real social groups, so they will actually do quite a lot of exploring the farm by themselves. They did at one point go into the farm owner's garden, which he still doesn't know about. So the experiment would have ended there, I think. So that's so that's a bit about us. Any questions or emails, please send them to me at the end of the talk.
Thank you very much, everybody. That was fantastic to see, and the photographs, it just puts in context everything that you're all doing. So I wondered whether we might be able to start talking a little bit about I presume that when people think about cow-calf systems for themselves in theory, or they start to work towards something that they've decided to do it, be it on a micro-dairy scale, or for yourself, Anna, you were doing some trials at home, that there's always going to be a trigger event. There'll be something that happens, something that stands out in a conversation, something that happens to you personally that means that you make this choice. I wondered whether you could all talk a little bit about whether that is the case for yourselves, or whether it was not so much a transformation decision as just an evolution of ideas. I know, Hal, you sort of, for you touched on it being quite a practical choice, but the cow-calf working, that they were doing this second milking for you, is that the only reason why? And then Phil and Anna, it'd be great to know as well from your own perspective whether there was something particular or more a sort of a growing decision.
The choice to have the calves on, it was probably 50% practical. If we were going to wean them at birth, say like conventional systems usually would, you've then got to deal with them in that respect, whether that's selling them or feeding them yourselves. Financially, it's actually not as beneficial to keep them on for what we sell milk compared to what you can get a litre of milk powder for. But because our system rested entirely on selling direct to the public, it was quite important that we did have something slightly different to show people. And one of our key USPs would be the fact that the calves stay with the cows, and we definitely gained a lot of customers purely off the back of that.
Well, Bill, I don't know whether there's anything stands out in your mind.
I came at it, I think, from a potentially more ideological standpoint. I spent most of my teenage years and early 20s kind of vegetarian or vegan, and quite quickly realised that wasn't a solution to the things that I was finding difficult. And so kind of pure stubbornness took me to the idea of cow-calf dairying. I think I'm probably less evangelical about it now. I'm actually having to do it. But yeah, it was definitely wanting to create a system that was hard to criticise. Obviously now I'm in it, there's plenty to criticise, but that was the initial theory.
Yeah, Anna, I don't know. Maybe more the question for you is the Nuffield, choosing that and then choosing to concentrate on it. Did you always have in mind it was something you were personally interested in doing, or more just the larger scale thought of what would the dairy industry look like? Yeah,
so going back, I never really expected to be practically farming in any way, and certainly like that whole system, the whole policy of separating cows and calves is something I'd never questioned, and I think most people in the dairy industry will never, have never questioned it because it's so ingrained a practice by now. And when I started to see commentary around cow-calf separation, I started asking myself, is this something that we should be doing? But was also very aware of like the practical difficulties of keeping cows and calves together on any dairy farm. And because there's two things that really triggered me into actually thinking this is something we could potentially do, and this is something that we should be aiming to work towards. And the first one is quite early on when I was working with Anderson's, I did a budget for somebody who wanted to start milking goats or milking sheep. It was a small ruminant. And while I was in the process of doing that budget, I was looking through our ABC costings book and realised that it was sheep actually, realised that sheep and lambs are separated in a sheep dairy. And I'd never thought about that. And when you actually look at all the research that's been done, most people who consume dairy products have never actually considered that a cow and calf are separated. And I'd never considered it for sheep. And my first thought seeing that was that I didn't like it. That was no different a sheep to a dairy cow. It's just that I'm very used to a dairy cow being separated from her calf. So that was my trigger for thinking it's maybe, it's actually something that I'd like to see changed, and I'd like to personally be part of that process of changing. And then in terms of whether it would be practical to work on our farm, it was meeting Chris in New Zealand, so seeing it work on a system quite similar to ours. There's always differences between New Zealand and here, mostly the fact that they don't have any housing, so all those issues around housed infrastructure and keeping cows and calves together isn't there. but seeing it work on his farm and seeing his attitude to it made me think it could be possible. So those were two things, I guess, that came together to really kind of complete my Nuffield and then also make me think about what could be done afterwards. And then in terms of actually trying it on our farm, I knew that I couldn't just go in one day and every single cow kept her calf, because we need significant investment on the farm to make that work. And that's a huge risk for something that's ideologically mine. To impose that on everybody involved in the business is quite a massive risk and an ask, because there is no commercial benefit for us doing it. We're doing it purely experimentally. I think if I'm going to start saying to people this is something we can do in the industry, then the first question is going to be, well, why aren't you doing it? So I guess I had to see if it could work on our farm before I started to recommending it or talking about it to other farmers. And it's just about wanting to do something a bit differently. Like, we've been doing mixed species swards on the farm since 2019. We're in Wales, there's no SFI, so we don't get any payment for it. Like, the choice to reseed into mixed species swards is done entirely because we thought there would be a benefit to it, but we were also prepared to take the cost for it. So yeah, it is for me, it's that kind of continuing process that I'd like to see a shift in the industry to doing this. But part of that is for me to actually take a very small risk and try it practically on our farm.
Yeah. Okay, slightly a little bit of maybe not fun, but fact and fictions around it. So I've had lots of people, farmers, friends, family, general conversations you have, where when you mention cow-calf contact systems, a lot of similar comments come up. I may be stealing a few questions that people have for the end of this session, but because they're so commonly asked, I thought it might be a bit of fun just to ask each of you what your experience is. I don't necessarily assume that there's going to be a consensus between you as to whether these are right or wrong, but I have heard them a lot. And I will say, these are not mine, these are what other people have said to me. So the first one, which is regularly cited, is that immediate removal at birth is better than a later removal at, be it 8, 10, 12 weeks, or separating overnight. The implication being that it's very stressful for the cow and calf to go through separation when they're fully bonded, or for that separation to be a sort of a regular event over a 24-hour period. Anna, I'll probably give that one to you and see whether the other two agree or not.
Yeah, that's a question that I get asked quite a lot, because when you start talking about keeping cows and calves together, that's a lot of dairy farmers will come back to me and say, well, if I separate the cow and calf straight away, so snatch calving, the cow shows a lot less of vocalization and stress than if I separate the cow and calf at 24 hours or a week old. My counter to that is always that there's a natural stage of weaning. I guess where it eventually goes is, should we be weaning calves at 8 to 12 weeks, or should we be weaning them at 6 months, like you would do in a suckler calf system? Weaning is a stress point in cow-calf contact systems. A lot of the research is around actually how to make that process best possible for cow and calf, and there's lots of different approaches to doing it, like the quiet wean collars that Hallam does, extended periods of separation, like fence line contact. There's lots of different ways to do it, and it can be really stressful. There's a farm in Norway that stopped doing it because the vocalization was so bad. They just couldn't get it to work without lots and lots of stress for both parties. All mammals have to be weaned at some point. So when people say, well, it's more stressful than to be weaned at 12 weeks, I always say, if you've got children, you wean them at some point. They're not still breastfeeding when they're 25. You had to do it, and it might have been stressful, but you did do it at some point. So the same thing happens with dairy cows. It's an area that needs more research, but there's no reason why it should be more stressful at 12 weeks or 6 months than it is up, 6 hours or 24 hours if you manage it correctly.
Brilliant. And for you two, I guess you're actually, they're together a longer period than 8, 10, 12 weeks. So is it a sort of a phased process where you don't see much stress? And for you guys, it's just a lot of question that...
Yeah, I think it obviously depends on your system, and it also depends on the individual cow. The sort of maternal instinct has almost been bred out of some cows, but then some will still remain very maternal. On a sort of cow-calf system, I think you do have to do it very slowly in a million different stages. But yeah, from my point of view, and from everyone who's milking point of view, is that you are there to produce milk. So there's going to come a point where weaning sort of has to occur, and it's just managing that. But yeah, we do it very slowly so that we actually end up weaning on just behind a piece of electric, and it seems to work so far. So yeah, it's just slow and steady. You've just got to be mindful of the fact that they do have a maternal bond with each other, and it's not just an instant break of that.
And I guess it's that difference between, I think, Anna, you raised this in your Nuffield report, nutritional and social weaning, that bond between the mother and the calf isn't necessarily the same thing as the nutritional need that they have for that milk. So access to the mum, whilst maybe being prevented from feeding, does deliver a type of bond that they've obviously already, spent a lot of time with the calves before you put those nose flaps on. So, the parlour will be chaos. I mean, Anna, it sounded like maybe it was a little bit chaos for your trial, but I don't know whether for when you started, Phyllida, what did you find for yourself, even at the micro dairy level? I guess the assumption would be, maybe for the audience here and for anybody thinking about it, that if you start smaller, that chaos is manageable. But then if you start to imagine it with bigger numbers, it would then become actually, not in any way bearable. But even at a small scale, did you find there was a lot of learning, a lot of adaptation you needed to make?
100%. I definitely spent the first year chasing calves, swearing a lot, crying a lot. And I quite quickly realised that the only way I was going to make it work was by managing the cows and basically forgetting about the calves. So the calves really are free range. It's hectic. They are safe, but they do what they want. The cows are the aspect of the relationship that is managed and is manageable, and that reduced the swearing, the crying and the chasing to a degree that's now quite I'm fine with, but definitely fine, she says with the eye twitch. It's definitely been a work in progress, and like Hallam touched on, ultimately they're individuals, and I think the nice thing on a small scale is you are able to treat them like individuals. So there might be cows that are more maternal and do end up suckling their calves for longer, and there might be cows that are horizontal and actually you end up weaning sooner. So I think the privilege of farming small is that you get that kind of individualized approach to what you're doing.
Brilliant. And Hal, I wonder whether you touched on this about maternal instinct, and obviously dairy cows very often, and shortly after the removal at birth, being potentially better question would be they don't have any maternal instinct, and dairy cows, aren't going to make good mums, or if they do make good mums, there's a high chance they're going to be too dangerous to milk. Is that something that you have any experience of, where you've thought, actually, this cow wants to be a suckler cow, and fair dues to her, or so far no problems from that front?
Yes. Because we were so small, I didn't really have a choice, so we had to make it. Every cow that we had to be a milking cow. Yep. Commercial dairy cows won't necessarily make bad mothers. It's just that, obviously, on a commercial system, you're not picking that genetic trait of maternal instinct. So they, it's some and some. Some will be very maternal, which I've seen commercially, and some, like you said, just don't, they don't give a damn. But
so more cows have personalities.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, and it's just about. The good thing is you just got to put enough time aside at the start, initially in the first sort of 2 weeks, to work out who's going to go mad and how to stop it going mad, and then sort of when the good ones come in, it's all nice and relaxing.
And Anna, I mean, you mentioned with you doing a trial at home that obviously you went for the end of season for practical reasons. They'd be going straight out to grass. Did you look at the cows that were due to calve at the end and think, oh Christ, no, or actually were you very interested in how they did all cope with being mums, and were you pleasantly surprised, or was it a mixed bag?
Yeah, it was a real mixed bag. So I think when we look at this, it's really important to remember that cows are all individuals. So they all have, like we all work practically with cows every day. You are aware of that. They all have different temperaments and different, like social groups within the herd. But their approaches to like their calves are very different. So Chris in New Zealand said that between 5 and 10% of his cow-calf pairs actually fail, and he has to make that choice to separate that cow and calf. So either because the cow isn't prepared to suckle the calf for whatever reason can't suckle, or sometimes because it's dangerous, because the cow is overprotective. And some of the farms I spoke to are now in that position where they are actually starting to breed for the right amount of maternal instinct. So not so much that they're like really dangerous beef suckler cows that will kill you, but also not so much that she just has the calf and turns her back on it. They want the cow that will raise the calf, but will also be, temperamentally suited to milk. So that's like a different approach to dairy genetics that will potentially have to go down if it becomes more popular. Yeah, certainly for us, because our cows hadn't done it before, we had no idea whether or not how they'd cope with it. The 7 in 2023 were all fantastic. They all did a really good job with their calves. You do see a bit of cross-suckling, like some cows will let another calf suckle on her a bit as well, and some are less keen on doing that. Then we tried it again this year, and we've only with 4 cows. It just had to wait until later in the season because of the weather, and actually all 4 of those pairs failed. So there's one set of twins who I think were maybe just a bit slow and weren't prepared to suckle, and the other ones, the cows showed no interest in them. And I don't know whether it was because the weather was the weather had been so horrendous. The moment it was dry, I was like, right, these cows and calves are just going outside with their calves, and potentially they didn't have enough time one-to-one in the shed to bond. That might have been the reason, or it could have just been that those cows in particular didn't have that maternal instinct. But this year I had to intervene and go out into the field and actually separate those calves and start feeding them artificially. So it is like that pragmatic ability that, again, I'm going to repeatedly quote Chris Falconer through this, but you don't sacrifice the animal for the system. So if that calf isn't feeding, or that cow's not prepared to feed her calf, then you need to separate them, even if it doesn't actually align with what you want to achieve overall.
And I think you've probably answered there something that's often put to me, which is, so this sounds good then, cow-calf systems, they obviously offer the highest level of animal welfare, and I think we've probably all touched on it earlier, and Anna, you just sort of answered that question, that it isn't in any way that straightforward. I don't know whether you want to talk a little bit about that, but essentially, from what you were saying, actually animal welfare is something that needs to be considered in any system, and cow-calf systems are not going to be immune from all the same challenges that anybody looking after livestock needs to keep an eye on. Cow-calf systems are not financially viable as a big one. I think it stems, when I've spoken to people about this, it stems from a starting position of low milk yield, that you're going to be losing milk in the system. The calf consumption rates will be too high, so there's going to be that lactation curve that dairy farmers would be used to. They're going to be seeing a big dip in that. It's going to be vanishing down the throats of the calves, and that the cows are reserving milk for the calves. So there's a lot of conversation around letdown, that cows aren't going to be letting down the milk to the farmer. They're going to be saving it for the calf, or if they are letting it down, they'll probably just give you the rubbish fore milk, and they'll keep all of the good quality hind milk for the calves. These are very practical issues, which would be great. I think Hallam, Phil, if you could talk a little bit about your experience of that. But more widely, I wonder whether, Anna, at the end, you could maybe come in and talk about the bit of checks and balance, the ins and outs of this, and maybe it's a little bit more complicated, and a bit about the research that you maybe covered during your Nuffield. But yeah, in terms of this letdown, is that something that is a constant struggle, something that you've found ways round? What's your experience?
Letdown was probably our biggest issue, I would have said. And annually it's got better. because we change things. And normally, you've got to commit to whatever your plan is to start with. But then eventually, if it doesn't work, you do have to be adaptable and you do have to change it. And I would have said, year on year, you do something sort of just at the end and it works, and you think, oh, okay, so you implement that the following year. But it depends. I don't think. I mean, I'd like to be full time on, my project, but financially it doesn't allow that, and that's not because it's not making money. It's because the scale of it is not so big that it can support a full-time person. It's a little bit about risk taking as well. A lot of it is funded just purely by me. So in terms of investment, I've got to build that slowly. So therefore, the whole business grows slowly as well. I can see it being full-time eventually. I think because if you're going to sell at 30p, then it isn't financially viable. But if you're going to sell at we sell at £2. What do you sell a litre? 350. So like the sort of difference is so massive between commercial and micro scale. And then you can easily on a smaller scale you can add things quite easily as well. So like we added ice cream, which again increases the value of the milk even more. So it's just trying to you're never going to make like tons of money just selling milk on a small scale. But if you're adaptable and you can add a few things into your product range and things like that, and I think even though the amount of milk is limited, you're maximising the value from it.
Letdown, definitely a challenge, and I think echoing Hallam, one of the biggest challenges, I think, in many ways, talking about the experience of the cow, when you remove the calf at birth, you're then just the replacement calf, so all the incentives there to give your milk. They're really smart, they're really clever, they absolutely know that you're a machine and their sweet little calf is right next door, so definitely a challenge. Again, a degree of kind of cow individuality in terms of how well that works. For me, that was a big reason why I started parting early on, so like 48 hours old. I found then the association with reuniting the calf with the mother was at the same time as milking, so the letdown association was there. But it does take work, and I do think my experience is that it does require extra labour. You are spending not an insignificant amount of time managing those processes early on. Cows are fantastic, as you probably know. Once they're in a routine, it works really well, but it definitely is kind of labour heavy, and I think as farmers we're probably all guilty of not necessarily financially valuing our time. So I absolutely think cow-calf systems can make money, and like Hallam said, especially if you're niche and you are charging what it's worth and more to make profit. I also think probably if I counted the hours up, especially in the first couple of years, I might come to a different conclusion, but we're all guilty of that, and early doors for my business, but I see it as something that can definitely work.
Yeah, Anna, I don't know that other side of it. I know you found some interesting, very early research, but some sort of positive aspects of considering that calves basically do drink milk, irrelevant of how you do it, but also about the yield of the cow. I wonder whether you might be able to talk about that a bit.
Yeah, so there's some really interesting research, and like anecdotally when you speak to people have very different experiences, so some people have difficulties with letdown and some don't, and there's a huge variation in terms of how much milk people think the calves are drinking versus the cows are producing in the parlour. And when you look at the kind of the published research, that some of the European stuff is suggesting like 35% lower milk yields when the calf is on the cow. But there's a really interesting piece of research come out of the University of Tasmania. They looked at pasture-based systems, spring block calving, with half-day contacts. The cows and calves were together for 12 hours and separated for 12 hours. And their modelling of the difference in parlour milk yield of cows in week 10, so comparing a control group where the calves were separated at birth to the suckle group, there was a 9 litre, around 9 litre difference in milk yield. But when you actually think about the amount of milk that calves should be drinking, and there's certainly a lot more, I guess, discussion now in the dairy industry actually about how much milk we should be giving to calves when we're artificially rearing them. 9 litres for a calf to drink isn't that far above what we should, it is what we should be feeding them. So that's one aspect of it that I think if you manage it and you've got maybe the right type of cows or a certain type of cows, the milk yield losses can maybe be less than we anticipate them to be. But that same piece of research then modelled the lactations of those cows after the calves were weaned and compared it to the control group. And the cows that had been suckled actually produced more milk for the rest of their lactation. So the idea is that because of that stimulation in early lactation, so from both the parlour and the milk, it got them to a higher peak milk yield. And when you think about commercial dairy farms in the UK and in terms of how we're rewarded for our milk produced in the autumn is generally worth more money than milk produced in the spring. So if you apply that system to a spring block calving system like mine, that litre of milk that you're losing to the calf in April, if you're able to gain that litre of milk back in September, you're able to sell it at a higher milk price. So your overall financial losses for the year might not actually be as bad as you think they are because you're gaining some of that back and you're gaining it back at a better price. But the other part that is maybe important to think about as well is that some of the early research is showing that milk fat production is lower in suckled cows then. And a lot of our milk contracts will reward you for the fat content. So when you think about human women who are breastfeeding, we know that the saliva, that a woman type of milk that a woman produces will be adapted specifically to the baby that she's suckling based on the saliva contact. The science of that is probably completely wrong. Apologies to anybody else. But we know that is actually happening with calves. There's also some work out there showing that the amount of milk, the parlour milk yield the cow produces is different whether she's suckling a male calf or a female calf, and whether that's that she keeps more milk back for one, or that the production is different. I'm not sure. But there's lots of different nuances to it beyond just the calf is physically drinking the milk, and we do need to think that the milk that we provide calves in an artificial system, in a reared system then, does have a financial cost, whether we're feeding them whole milk or powdered milk.
Yeah, and I think it probably just highlights there's a huge amount more research needed for any kind of dairy farmer to take confidence in the figures. But there's also, I know, some research showing about live weight gain for the beef calves as well. And so I know you were talking about maybe looking at expanding the beef side of it. And I think that's maybe not spoken about within this conversation because it comes from a dairy perspective. But of course, effectively, as the dairy industry at large is becoming quite dual purpose, I think it's also quite interesting to look at the success of those beef calves that are suckled in terms of getting to weight a little bit quicker for weaning or gaining weight a bit faster. And also just for me, I have a lot of questions around the health of the replacement heifers. I don't know have you seen any research, Anna, about heifers coming back into a herd that have had access in terms of, that microbiome conversation is sort of ramping up in agricultural research, but presumably you'd expect it to have some sort of long-term health benefit to the heifers coming back into a herd.
Yeah, the longitudinal studies, like peer-reviewed research, aren't necessarily there yet. So there's not a lot of research that's followed a calf that's suckled all the way through her life. The stuff that is out there, speaking to farmers on the ground, is that they do think because the calves lay down more fat reserves during the pre-wean period, that they are actually more resilient later on in life. Though there is one piece of research which shows that because those calves have been exposed to the adult cow environment, they experience less stress when they come back into the herd. So they're weaned, they go off with the heifer group. When they calve back in and they come into the shed, they've already seen the cow cubicles, they've already seen the parlour, and that might support whether they have a better transition back into the milking herd. And when we reflect on the fact that the retention of heifers to second lactation in the UK is a sticking point for the industry, so far more heifers fail to make their second calving than they should, and a lot of that is down to the stress they have in their first lactation, because they're suddenly the smallest, youngest animals in a herd of mature cows, and there's a lot of stress for them to get back in calf and to stay healthy. So if they have an earlier transition and they can actually find it easier to transition into the milking herd and they last longer, then that brings an indirect financial benefit as well.
Very conscious to make sure we've got plenty of time for questions, but I promised somebody I would ask this question, and I'm slightly wondering who's brave enough to answer it. But do we think that the historical underrepresentation of female farmers has favoured qualities like productivity over relational-based approaches like cow-calf contact systems? Is anyone willing to give that one a go?
I'll go first, Phyllida.
Such a good question, and so interesting. And I think while we have to be really careful not to stereotype by gender and things, I do think for me personally, I can only speak from my experience, but one of the most profound experiences of my life in terms of how it impacted this approach to farming was feeding my own children over almost 10 years. And while I think we have to tread carefully in kind of projecting human feelings onto animals, I do think there is an inarguable kind of shared mammalian experience of kind of love and protection and nourishment. And I think so. I guess it's easier to access those feelings and that empathy and that understanding as a female. Whether or not that translates, who knows? But
yeah, no, I don't know whether you've got anything to add to that.
Yeah. Do you want to
go?
Yeah, you can go after me, okay. Yeah, there is. I mean, when I was looking at cow-calf contact farms, a huge number of them are represented by women, and the research kind of body around cow-calf contact is almost exclusively women. I don't think I didn't speak to a single man who was involved in it. I'm in a group of PhD students. I'm not a PhD student, but they let me in. Who discuss cow-calf contact, and they are all women. So that is definitely there, and there's a Norwegian piece of research that came out of Norway that looked at cow-calf contact, and they found that cow-calf contact farmers were disproportionately female. So I think there is definitely something in it, but within this particular movement, there are a lot of women there. There are also a lot of men, especially on the, I think it gets quite interesting, on the larger scale side of it. So some of those larger scale cow-calf contact dairy farms are run by men. And the triggers for doing it, like I haven't got children, I'm not particularly maternal unless it's fluffy with 4 legs. But there definitely are people who said they started thinking about it after they had their own children, or their wives or their partners had babies, and they saw that kind of that bond and also that benefit to their children, and were like, actually maybe we could apply this to farms. But I'd be the first person to say that the dairy industry, or the agricultural industry as a whole, has got a problem with sexism. It's got a lot of other problems as well with other isms, but we'll just focus on one for now. And maybe this is something that we talk about, actually increasing diversity in the industry, bringing in new ideas and new experiences, and how that can benefit everybody. Maybe this is just one example of it. One very small example of how that increased diversity can benefit everybody.
Yeah. I wonder whether, I'm very conscious, so many questions that I hope we get through, and we're not going to have a chance to talk about everything before we move to questions. But one thing I just wondered if we could very quickly discuss is scalability. I know obviously there are many more cow-calf system micro-dairies out there, and not as many examples, although there are examples, as you say. I know there's David, obviously from the Ethical Dairy in Scotland, as a great example at scale. But I wonder, Anna, do you think it, well, 2 questions. Hallam and Phil, do you have scaling up in mind? Is it something that you're interested in and that you think you're going to be able to achieve? And you were saying about cow-calf obviously really suiting as a second milking. Do you see that there's going to be a commercial pressure that it becomes something that you would also consider not doing? Or is it something you're now connected into, and so actually you want to grow and maintain it? Same question for you, Phil, but also, Anna, from your perspective, Are we talking just infrastructure problems? Is it about incentive? Is this something that we think really is scalable? And are we even interested in scaling it up?
Yeah, it is definitely scalable, and like you say, like Mr. Finley's ethical dairy has proved that. We are looking to, as our customer demand grows, we are looking to expand. We will always be micro, as in smaller scale, and that's what basically gives us our ability to charge more. But you can, I think, if it's done sort of relatively slowly, you can maintain your sort of moral, sort of primary morals, whilst making it, more commercially viable at the same time.
Yeah.
I agree. I definitely think it's scalable, but I do think we have to be careful with the idea that we can kind of pluck a concept and chuck it into bigger systems and bigger dairies. Anna's touched on infrastructure. I think there are more complexities and there are more things that need to be considered, and it is a slight paradigm shift in terms of how we think about food production and how we think about the animals themselves. So for me, no scaling. I want to do other things and I have other interests and other work, so I very much appreciate the fact that it's part-time and fits around life. But yes, I think it's most exciting if we can really look at like how can these ideas edge into the mainstream. But I do think, like I say, it does take a slight paradigm shift in how we're thinking about food production as a whole.
Yeah, so I guess the starting point is that it can work on scale because there are people doing it. So David Finley in Scotland and Sam down in Tall River Dairy are probably the two biggest farms that I'd actually be aware of. But there are other farms doing it who actually aren't selling branded milk aren't selling branded milk in the UK. I've got a farmer in a discussion group who's got a vending machine. They do partial cow-calf contact system. They've made a conscious decision not to actively market their milk based on cow-calf contact. And part of that is because they don't want to position their system as better than anybody else's system. So those farms are out there, and also they are making it stack up financially because it's happening year after year. In terms of implementing it on a wider scale, the two key barriers, I guess, for me, three would be infrastructure, mycobacterial disease, and then financials will come on top of that. So starting with infrastructure, if you have got a larger scale farm, you're probably not starting from scratch, so you're having to work with the infrastructure you already have. So if I think about our farm, we've got slurry channels with slats that run across the front of the collecting yard and the shed. Those are perfectly the right size as a calf's foot. So if you had calves and cows in one gang coming in to be milked, even if the calves made that decision, they didn't want to go into the parlour, they would potentially have legs going down those slats, and that's a welfare cost, a welfare issue. And the cost of changing that would be quite huge. We're also using, we've got quite a narrow collecting yard, quite a small collecting yard, so having calves in there would be a risk. And the whole idea of keeping cows and calves together in the cubicles at the start of the calving block, I'd want to see some changes to that to make it viable. So adapting existing infrastructure, depending on what that already looks like, can be quite low cost, or for some people it's quite high cost, so that's certainly a barrier. And that kind of knowledge exchange and lived experience of it becomes a barrier then, because if you can't see somebody else making it work, all that risk is on you to do it, and that can be quite a big financial risk. And again, if you're not starting from scratch, buying in a herd that is clean of it, and then keeping that disease out, Yoni's and then tuberculosis, early separation of cow and calves is a key aspect of Yoni's management plans in the UK. Yoni's is an endemic disease. Most herds in the UK will have it. Where we see cow-calf contact on, more widespread on larger farms, it's in countries in Northern Europe where Yoni's disease is either eradicated or it's at very, very low prevalence rates, so it doesn't become an issue. So I think working towards eradicating Yoni's disease would be a real key part of this if this is going to become a more popular choice of system. And the same with TB. We've been under TB restrictions for 7 years, and I think when we've actually really looked at, how is that disease remaining in the herd. The calving shed probably is where it's happening. The calves are probably picking it up from cows that haven't reacted to the skin test yet in the calving shed, which again, to get rid of that, you might actually have to go through a period of really strict cow-calf separation to get that disease out before you start bringing everybody together. And then that last one is financial. So if you are going to invest in infrastructure changes, the modelling I did for my Nuffield showed that on a profit and loss basis, cow-calf contact can work, but then that kind of depends on what your profit requirement is. So if you've had to invest quite a lot in infrastructure, you're going to have a higher cash need on your business. So to repay that, you probably do need a higher milk price. On a larger scale, added value milk sales might not bring that. We produce nearly 1.5 million litres of milk in West Wales. There's a dairy farm there, and a dairy farm there, and a dairy farm there. There's not a lot of people. Socioeconomically, it's not the most affluent area. I can't sell milk to them at £2 a litre. I certainly can't process that volume of milk myself. So it needs to go to a commercial processor. Also, not every dairy farmer has, like the marketing ability and even, the ability to communicate with the public that you need if you're going to do added value milk sales. So the answer to that then, in terms of wider spread take up, is probably that some milk processor says, we will sell an added value line of milk. We'll pick up your milk, deal with all the marketing and take all that risk ourselves. We see that already. Germany, the Netherlands and Denmark all have cow-calf contact label milk that you can buy in supermarkets. The Danish farmers I spoke to weren't actually getting a premium for supplying that milk. But in Germany, sort of from what I found online, I think the premium is about 20 cents per litre, which is huge. And if you gave me 20 pence a litre extra for doing cow-calf contact dairying, I think we'd have the builders in tomorrow,
Yeah, and it's probably worth mentioning that for all dairy farmers, they take great pride in their calf rearing and take very seriously that disease crossover and making sure that their calves do get through those first few weeks. And it would be inconceivable for many of them for the injury risk, for the disease risk at the moment. We've only got a very short amount of time left, so I do want to give some time to everybody out there to ask any questions. Has anybody in the room got anything they'd like to ask? Oh yes, lots. I'm so sorry. Let's try and get round everybody. Let's go for the gentleman at the front in the blue jumper, and then we'll go to the lady with the brown jumper, and then I'm going to head online and come back to the room after that. Hello.
Hi, Anna. The dual purpose cows, with the dual purpose cows, what ratio of, is it Anna or Emma, the one in the middle?
Oh, Phyllida.
Sorry,
That's
sorry.
okay.
I'm sorry, I got the name wrong.
No worries.
With your dual purpose, what's your ratio of your income for the milk versus the beef?
Oh, good question. Definitely primarily milk, so that absolutely is primarily, but I couldn't give you an exact percentage, and I haven't finished as many animals as I probably want to longer term, but absolutely of not equal importance, but significantly important, both financially and also I think philosophically, closing that loop and seeing it as an intrinsically valuable part of the dairy system.
And is it fairly common to have the dual purpose, or is that more?
I think less common, and I think you are sacrificing probably a degree of yield. I couldn't tell you how much, but for me, having cows that look after themselves, can winter outdoors, can do fine on just forage, outweighs the slight loss that I'll be getting in terms of volume.
Thank you.
And the lady in the brown jumper just in the middle there. Thank you.
Hi, a question for all three on the panel. What has your experience been of getting cows back in calf while they're still rearing their calf?
So we run an Angus bull for 6 weeks. I'm very strict about the calving block because I like my time off in the winter. 6 weeks. If cows don't get in calf in that period, they're pretty much out. So that's quite non-negotiable for me. Pretty successful. I had done a bit of AI before, which was less successful. I think that was potentially more my error than the cows. So But yeah, no problems. But fertility is a real priority in terms of what I breed for and what I tolerate.
The same as because we block calve in the spring. It's obviously vitally important that they all get back in calf for the spring. I'm quite lucky in that my sister's a farm vet, so we put together quite a robust sort of sync and AI program. And we were very lucky with that. We managed to get everything back in calf first time every year so far, which is quite a surprise, but it may be that there's less pressure on the cow, therefore it sort of works slightly better. But yeah, it's the biggest sort of pressure. I have known people have problems putting them back in calf. It would sort of depend on your system, whether you can afford to have them a bit later or maybe run them into a secondary beef herd or something like that. But it is probably a big issue, yeah.
I think that's also quite interesting that probably there would be some assumptions that if you're at a smaller scale, you're going to go easy on the cows. So I'm really, it's interesting and good to know that the efficiency for fertility for you both is still up there. Could we try and take a question from online? Is there anybody there waiting?
Yeah, you just covered one of the questions from online about fertility, but we've got one other from Laura. And Laura asks, I get my own dairy from a local calf-at-foot dairy farm, direct from the farm. I know it's controversial, but what's the panel's views on raw milk and raw milk products?
I'm inclined to ask Phil if you want to talk about that, given you...
So I think raw milk's an interesting one. It's quite Marmite. It divides people. People are either quite evangelical about it or they think it's the end of everything. It's definitely popular. I think it's having a bit of a resurgence. I think the more we think about nutritional quality of food, it's popular. In terms of my business, it's the most fragile part. We're in the West Country, there's a lot of TB, so it's something I think about often in terms of running a business and having a market that resides on being raw. I sit somewhere between being evangelical and thinking it's terrible. I think it's a great product, and I think if it's produced in a way that's clean and healthy from healthy animals, it's, for the most part, a great thing. I think, like anything, it's the management within the production system rather than the system itself that defines safety and etc.
Great, thanks.
Thank you. In the room, where have we got? I'm not going to apologise to say that I can see David from the Ethical Dairy at the back there. And I'm almost inclined to say, do you want to come and join us on stage, David? But yes, you have a question.
Thanks very much. I felt I had to say something because we've been mentioned a couple of times. And congratulations to the young people here. It's great to see you coming forward. Good luck to you. All I really wanted to say was that we are now into our 9th year of the whole farm, 120 cows in a cow-calf contact system. And for us, when we converted to organic, eventually, when we got our heads around organic, it worked better than conventional in terms of profitability. And we can see cow-calf contact dairying being more profitable than it was when we were converted to organic. It is a superb way of producing milk and beef in this country. So I give you some. Keep going. Don't lose faith. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Yeah. Other hands. Oh, let's have a look. There's a gentleman. 1, 2, 3, 4 rows back with a green fleece or wool jumper on. And then there's a lady on the other side here with a cream jumper on, second row back.
Just want to ask, really, what's the management of the heifers coming into the herd as replacement heifers like? We've got 10 heifers due to come in, all been cow-calf reared, stonking calves, great animals, stand out from the pack, but boy, when it comes to handling them, they're a different kettle of fish. So I'm asking really on behalf of my son, because he's the one that's looking at calving them next month.
Okay, so that was a question about bringing heifers back in and the management of them.
I can speak to the fact that dam-raised calves are definitely wild compared to bottle-fed counterparts, and it's absolutely, in my experience, a completely different kettle of fish. All mine are bred back to beef, so unfortunately I'm not able to breed replacements, but Hallam and Anna can speak to that.
Most heifers that come into the parlour are a bit spicy, but there's this idea that if they've been reared on on the system, they've been in the parlour before and all this, and I can't say that rings particularly true. They're not easier. They take a bit more time to settle down. One year we tried, and we actually weaned the calf earlier, so the cow could focus solely on getting used to milking. And so we had 2 heifers and they ran with no calves, and the older cows did. I don't think it made any difference particularly. We probably wouldn't do it again, but it was just when we first started, the 3 that we bought came from a already conventional system, so they were used to the machine, and that was lovely to get going. It was one thing we didn't have to worry about. Going forward with micro dairies, it's a small setup. We probably would realistically look at just buying in replacements because they would be so few and far between, and maybe focus on a more beefy calf to then take it through for direct beef sales.
My advice with dairy shorthorn milking was I got very used to getting my shoulder really close in and firm on that back leg for the heifers when they're coming in for milking. But final question, couple of minutes left. There's a lady on the second row with the white jumper on.
Thank you very much. We are in the process of setting up a micro dairy with cow with calf at foot. And we are looking at not separating the calves at all from the mothers. And Hallam and Phyllida, from your experience, is this something that you would try on your own farms? Or is it something that you've played around with? And what are your views on not separating at all?
I've found you get to 6 to 8 weeks, even with dairy breeds, and the calves will just drink all the milk. It's definitely, it's not necessarily a case of what the cow's producing, because I had a Jersey who was from a conventional system and was probably producing kind of 30 litres a day. They will drink it. Which is obviously not good for the calf. It's definitely not good for you when you look in your milk machine and there's this much milk. That's my experience, but Hallam, speak to yours.
We tried it the first year, and it just didn't work. Like I said, we're there to produce milk, and we were leaving them on to start with completely 24/7. People do it, definitely, so it can be done. System and individual cows again. We just found in terms of with the milk letdown problems as well, if you separated them overnight, for example, you just put a bit more pressure on, so they're just slightly more likely, especially in the early stages, they're more likely to release for the machine so that you can have something to sell at the end of the day. It can be done. So if that's what you want to do, then stick to it and work a way around it.
Thank you. I'm so sorry we've run out of time. I'm so sorry for anybody online who had questions, and for people in the room. There was many more questions, and I don't think we've covered half of the things that I was hoping to talk about. But everybody here is either easily findable on Instagram, online. I'm sure they'd all be very happy to receive emails or questions from anybody. A huge thank you to you all for taking time out to be here, and thank you for everybody for coming to listen.